I've always believed there are moments in life when the air changes, when you can almost smell that something is about to go wrong, even before it happens. That Saturday was one of those days. The sky was too calm, the streets too quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. And maybe it was. Because by the time the sun set, I would be standing in a banquet hall filled with the clinking of champagne glasses, fake smiles, and a danger I could not yet see, but my son already felt. If I had known what would unfold, I would have burned that invitation the second I saw it. But back then, I told myself I was doing the right thing, showing up, for him. Always for him. I'm a divorced man. My marriage ended 3 years ago, not with shouting, not with one final explosive fight, but with the slow rot of betrayal that seeps in like water under a door. She, my ex-wife, had her reasons, or at least the ones she gave. But I knew the truth. People don't fall out of love overnight, they replace you piece by piece until there's nothing left to hold on to. Still, we shared something we could never replace, Liam. 8 years old, bright-eyed, with that stubborn mix of my determination and her charm. When he told me he was going to be the ring security at his mother's wedding, dressed in a little suit with sunglasses and an earpiece, I saw the pride in his eyes. And I couldn't deny him the one thing he asked of me, to be there, watching him. The venue was a monument to extravagance, a luxury banquet hall with crystal chandeliers suspended from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the clouds. Gold accents traced every corner, the marble floors gleamed like mirrors, and a string quartet played soft classical music in the corner. Guests moved like actors in a stage play, every smile rehearsed, every laugh a little too sharp. I stayed near the back, hands in my pockets, an outsider in a room that pretended to welcome me. I knew I wasn't wanted there. The glances told me so. Her new family's eyes were sharp, dissecting me in silence. It didn't take long for the silence to break. Her brother approached me, the same smug grin he wore when I last saw him years ago. "Why are you even here?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "She's moved on, to a real man." Laughter erupted from the group around him, as if they'd been waiting for the punchline. I didn't respond. Words would have been wasted on them. Instead, I scanned the room until my eyes landed on Liam. He was standing by the edge of the dance floor, his little chest puffed out with pride, holding that ring pillow like it was the most important mission in the world. But then, something in his face changed. The pride faltered. His eyes darted toward the ceiling, then to the far corner of the room, then back to me. He started walking quickly, weaving between tables until he was right in front of me. His small hand grabbed my sleeve with a grip that was far too strong for a boy his age. His voice was low, trembling. "Dad, we need to go. Now." At first, I thought it was nerves, maybe stage fright. But then I saw it, the wide, urgent look in his eyes, the kind that belongs to someone who knows something bad is about to happen. "Please, Dad. Trust me." Every instinct in me wanted to question him, to calm him down, to tell him we'd leave after he'd done his part. But there was something in his tone that went deeper than fear, it was certainty. I'd learned a long time ago, in moments that could make or break a life, you listen to that voice inside. And right now, his voice was my voice. I nodded once, and we began moving toward the exit. I didn't rush, but my pulse was already pounding in my ears. We were halfway across the room when it happened. The sound was unlike anything I'd heard before, a violent metallic snap followed by the groan of heavy chains giving way. People froze for a fraction of a second, eyes lifting toward the ceiling, before the scream began. The chandelier, massive, glittering, a crown of light, was falling. Time slowed in a cruel way, the way it does when you're watching disaster unfold and you know you can't stop it. It hit the ground with a force that shook the floor, shattering into thousands of razor-edged shards. The explosion of glass and metal was followed by chaos, tables overturned, guests screaming, the music cutting off in a single strangled note from a violin. I spun around, instinct driving me to shield Liam, to make sure he was out of harm's way. My eyes swept the scene, looking for the injured, for the cause. And that's when I saw them, two men in black suits, standing near the wreckage but untouched by it. They didn't move like panicked guests. They didn't even flinch. Their eyes scanned the room with cold calculation, the kind you only learn in one place, the military. They weren't there to celebrate. They were there for a purpose. And then it hit me, they were looking for someone. I felt Liam press against my side, his little voice almost swallowed by the noise. "Dad. I told you." His eyes weren't wide with shock, they were steady, knowing. This wasn't surprise for him. This was confirmation. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't an accident. And my son, my 8-year-old son, had known it was coming. That night, I would replay those moments again and again, searching for the signs I'd missed, the clues that had been hiding in plain sight. But in that instant, I didn't have time for questions. I just knew one thing, walking into that wedding had been a mistake. And yet, leaving now, alive, with my son beside me, might have been the first step in something far bigger than either of us could imagine. I've lived through storms before, real ones. The kind where the sky turns black at noon, wind rips trees out of the ground, and lightning carves the earth in blinding flashes. But nothing prepared me for the storm that erupted inside that banquet hall. It didn't begin with the crash, it began with the sound right before it. A single, sharp metallic crack, loud enough to slice through the chatter of clinking glasses and the sweet, hollow strings of the quartet. It was the kind of sound that forces your head up before your mind even processes why. I followed the noise instinctively, my eyes lifting toward the glittering monster hanging above the dance floor. The chandelier was massive, 6, maybe 7 feet across, its frame heavy with gold-plated arms and dripping with hundreds of crystal prisms. For a split second, it swayed unnaturally, like a pendulum caught in a sudden gust. And then I saw it, the fracture in the chain, a dark, jagged wound against the polished metal. Time slowed in that cruel way it does when you're witnessing something catastrophic. There was a collective gasp from the crowd, followed by one high-pitched scream that seemed to shatter the spell of stillness. The chain snapped. The chandelier fell. Not gracefully, not like a delicate thing giving in to gravity, but like a predator dropping from the ceiling with lethal intent. The crash was deafening, a violent explosion of crystal and metal that seemed to shake the very bones of the building. I felt the vibration through the soles of my shoes, up my legs, into my chest. Shards of crystal became weapons, slicing through the air with deadly precision. I saw a woman's gown tear open as glass grazed her hip, saw a man clutch his bleeding forearm, his champagne flute still absurdly clutched in his other hand. The air filled with the acrid scent of burning wires as one of the chandelier's bulbs burst, sending smoke curling upward toward the ruined ceiling. The music had stopped mid-note, one violin string still vibrating from the last bow stroke, now eerily out of place in the chaos. People ran, but they didn't run smart. They crashed into each other, tripping over fallen chairs, overturning tables in frantic attempts to escape. The sound of heels skidding on marble mixed with the low, guttural cries of pain. Waiters dropped trays, silverware clattering across the floor like falling coins. Somewhere in the crush of bodies, a child was screaming for their mother. I turned sharply, my arm instinctively wrapping around Liam, shielding him from the hail of glass still raining down in smaller pieces. And that's when I saw them. Amid the chaos, two men stood almost completely still. They were dressed in black suits, not tuxedos, not formal wear that matched the celebration, but suits of a different kind. Functional. Intentional. Their shoulders were squared, feet planted, eyes scanning the room in swift, calculated sweeps. They weren't reacting to the accident like the others. They weren't looking for shelter or helping the injured. They were looking for someone. Something about them was off. Not just the way they moved, but the way they didn't. I've been around military men before, there's a discipline, a stillness in their posture, even under stress. These men had it. Their eyes didn't dart in panic, they shifted like chess pieces, marking threats, assessing positions. And it hit me, security, maybe, but not for this event. Not the kind that's paid to protect guests from drunken uncles or uninvited plus ones. This was different. They weren't protecting the people in this room. I tightened my grip on Liam, ready to move us both toward the nearest exit, when I felt his hand press against mine in a way that stopped me cold. It wasn't fear, it was a warning. I looked down and found him staring not at the wreckage, not at the screaming guests, but directly at those two men. His expression was strange, calm, almost resigned. Like someone watching the next step in a sequence they've already memorized. "Dad," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the chaos. "They're here because of you." The words hit harder than the crash had. I searched his face, looking for some sign he was just scared, that this was the imagination of an 8-year-old spun out by a traumatic moment. But his eyes didn't flinch. He knew. And that meant whatever had just happened wasn't random. The chandelier hadn't just fallen, it had been dropped. And those men, they weren't here to rescue anyone. The panic in the room swelled. Guests pressed toward the exits, shouting over each other, tripping in their rush to get away from the destruction. A few brave, or foolish, souls tried to help the injured, tearing tablecloths into makeshift bandages. The staff looked overwhelmed, some even frozen in place. But through it all, the two men in black moved closer, closing the distance between themselves and where we stood. I shifted my stance, putting myself between them and my son, my mind running through every possible scenario in a matter of seconds. I could confront them now, risk drawing attention. I could disappear into the crowd and hope they lost us in the chaos. Or I could do what Liam was silently telling me to do, leave. Now. Before they made their move. I chose the last option. Pulling him close, I moved us toward the side door near the catering entrance, away from the bottleneck of people flooding the main exit. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder. They were still there, moving with deliberate pace, not rushing, not chasing, but closing in nonetheless. By the time we slipped into the narrow service corridor, the noise of the banquet hall was a muffled roar behind us. My pulse was in my throat, my mind replaying the moment Liam had looked at me and said those words. "They're here because of you." I didn't know how he knew. I didn't know why he knew. But I knew one thing for certain, this wasn't over. The chandelier was just the opening move. And as much as the chaos behind us had been terrifying, it was the calm certainty in my son's eyes that chilled me most. Because that kind of knowing doesn't come from fear. It comes from information. Information he shouldn't have had, unless he'd heard something I hadn't. Unless this plan had been set in motion long before we ever walked into that glittering, deadly room. Sleep didn't come easy the night before the wedding. Maybe it was the thought of walking into a room where every eye would measure me, weigh me, and dismiss me. Maybe it was something deeper, an unease I couldn't name. Liam had gone to bed early, or so I thought. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway. I was sitting in the living room, half watching the late news, when I heard the creak. It was the creak of the floorboard outside Liam's room. I muted the TV, my attention sharpening. At first, I thought he was coming to tell me he couldn't sleep, maybe ask for a glass of water. But the sound didn't move toward me, it moved toward the front of the house. Light footsteps, careful, deliberate. My instincts told me not to call out. Instead, I rose quietly and followed, my bare feet making no sound on the carpet. I found him standing in the darkened hallway, just beyond the bend that led to the small study I rarely used. The door was slightly ajar, and a thin strip of light spilled onto the floor. I was about to step forward when I heard it, the muffled sound of voices. Not Liam's. Adults. One was a man's, deep and unfamiliar. The other, my stomach tightened. It was her voice. My ex-wife. I pressed my back against the wall, leaning just enough to catch the words. They weren't speaking loudly, but their tones were sharp, precise. "It has to look like an accident," the man said. "No mess, no questions." Her voice followed, colder than I remembered. "I don't care how you do it, as long as it's due. Be out of the way. Permanently." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I glanced at Liam, his face was pale, his eyes fixed on the narrow slit of light. He wasn't just overhearing, he was memorizing every word. The third voice entered then, someone I didn't recognize. Calm, clinical. "If he's not hurt," the voice said, "someone else will be. We'll make sure of it." The silence that followed was heavier than the words themselves. I could hear my ex-wife's measured breathing, then the scrape of a chair. The conversation was ending. I grabbed Liam's hand, gently but firmly, and led him back down the hall before they emerged. We slipped into his room just as footsteps crossed into the living room. I closed the door behind us and turned to him. "What did you hear?" I asked, my voice low but urgent. He hesitated, chewing his lip the way he did when he was holding something back. "Enough," he said finally. "Enough to know they're going to hurt you tomorrow." His voice cracked, and for a moment, he looked smaller than his 8 years. "Dad, they're serious. And if they don't, if they can't hurt you, they're going to hurt someone else. Someone who doesn't deserve it." The words landed like stones in my chest. I wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that he had misunderstood. But I had heard it too. And the cold certainty in his eyes told me this wasn't a child's overactive imagination. I felt the heat of anger rise in me, mixing with something darker, betrayal. Not the kind you feel when someone lies to you, but the kind that rewrites everything you thought you knew about a person. She wasn't just moving on with her life, she was planning to erase me from mine. I knelt in front of him, trying to keep my voice steady. "You did the right thing telling me, Liam. But you can't repeat this to anyone else, not yet. Do you understand?" He nodded, his small hands twisting in the fabric of his pajama pants. I could see the conflict in his face, the fear of what was coming, and the weight of the secret he now carried. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, my mind replaying the conversation like a broken record. The details were sharp, the tone of her voice, the certainty in that man's words, the threat that lingered in the third voice. And under it all, the knowledge that my son had been the one to warn me, to pull me back from walking straight into whatever they had planned. I thought about what "someone else will be" really meant. A guest? A stranger? Or someone Liam cared about? The possibilities twisted in my gut. I wasn't just angry, I was calculating. Every instinct I had screamed to confront her immediately, to demand answers. But another part of me, the part that had survived hard lessons before, told me that would be exactly what they wanted, to force me into a move they could control. When I checked on Liam in the early hours, he was asleep at last, his small body curled under the blanket, his brow furrowed even in rest. I sat on the edge of his bed and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. I thought about how unfair it was, how an 8-year-old should never have to hear words like the ones he'd heard, should never have to carry the fear that comes with them. And yet, he had faced it without breaking, without running to hide. That was when I realized something that chilled me even more than the threat itself. Liam wasn't just afraid for me. He was afraid for whoever would be the backup target. That meant he had heard more than he'd told me. Details he was keeping back, maybe to protect me, maybe because speaking them out loud would make them too real. I didn't push him. There would be time for that. But as I sat there, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing, I made a silent promise. Whatever they had planned, whoever they thought they could hurt to get to me, I would make sure it never happened. Not to me. Not to anyone else. The sun was just beginning to rise when I finally moved from his room, the first light creeping through the blinds in thin golden lines. The world outside was waking up as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I knew now that tomorrow wasn't just another day, and that wedding wasn't just another awkward family event. It was a trap. One I would walk into, but not the way they expected. I didn't call Marcus right away. That morning after the chandelier incident, I sat in my kitchen, staring into a mug of coffee that had gone cold before I'd even lifted it. The house felt too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, listening for the next fracture. My phone lay face down on the table. I kept telling myself that turning it over, dialing his number, would be the point of no return. Once I called Marcus, I wouldn't be allowed the luxury of pretending any of this had been an accident. The chandelier didn't simply fall. The men in black didn't simply appear. And an 8-year-old doesn't warn his father to leave a wedding unless he's certain the ground is about to give way. When I finally typed his number from memory, he answered on the second ring. He never said hello. "What's wrong?" he asked, as if he were already sitting across from me, reading the tension in my shoulders. I told him everything, the whisper of metal before the crash, the two men who watched the chaos like surveyors, the look in Liam's eyes, and the conversation my son and I had shared in the dark hall the night before. I included the part one didn't want to say out loud, that she, my ex-wife, wasn't just moving on, she might have signed the permission slip for my disappearance. There was a brief pause. "Where are you?" he asked. I told him. "Don't move." He arrived in 20 minutes that felt like an hour. Marcus carried the kind of silence that swallows a room and settles everything inside it. Ex-military, compact and measured, he looked at each corner of my kitchen before he looked at me, like he was cataloging angles, lines of sight, entry points, exits. He sat, took out a battered notebook, and said, "Start from the beginning. Don't round the edges." So I started again, slower, cleaner, with every detail that memory could pull up. The exact pitch of the metallic snap. The way the chandelier seemed to hang in the air for one impossible heartbeat. The way the two men positioned their feet, weight evenly distributed, eyes sliding over the crowd. The quote Liam remembered from the night before, "If he's not hurt, someone else will be." Marcus's pen scratched, short, straight lines, arrows, numbers in the margins. When I finished, he flipped the notebook shut without a flourish. "This isn't amateur," he said. "She didn't pull this together with a florist and a wedding planner. Whoever's tied to her fiancé knows how to plan a hit to look like misfortune." "Then we go to the police," I said, though even as I spoke the words, they felt soft and insufficient. Marcus smiled without warmth. "And tell them what?" A chandelier fell and two men stood still. "Your ex has a new husband with offshore accounts." He shook his head. "Cops are good at solving crimes that have already happened. These people specialize in crimes that look like they didn't." He waited until the anger in me stopped boiling and started focusing. "We don't run to authority," he said. "We build leverage. Quietly. Leverage makes people stand down." The next days assembled themselves into a grid I recognized from a former life: watch, note, verify, loop. Marcus was a metronome. Morning check-ins, afternoon fieldwork, nights stitched with data. He didn't explain every move, and I didn't ask. Some doors are easier to walk through if you don't know who opened them. First, he mapped the obvious: names, companies, addresses, relationships. My ex-wife's new husband, Daniel Pierce, wasn't just a businessman with expensive tastes. He was a conduit. Boards and advisory titles that sounded impressive but connected to companies without products, revenue, or souls. Shells. A network of LLCs nested inside one another like Russian dolls designed to confuse the untrained eye. Marcus brought the structure up on my laptop: boxes and arrows, flows of money that jumped jurisdictions, then vanished into thin island air. At night, my living room became a dim control room. Liam slept in his room with the door cracked open. I listened to the faint rhythm of his breathing as Marcus pulled down files from databases that didn't belong to us. Nothing flashy. No brute force. He walked in like an invited guest who knew where the silverware was kept. Old habits, he called them friendships, did the heavy lifting. On the third night, he slid a printout toward me. A grainy still from a security camera, one of the men from the wedding. The jacket, the stance, the face that refused to look surprised by anything. Ex-Special Forces, Marcus said. Contracted private after leaving. There's a gap in his resume we can't see, which usually means it was paid for secrecy. He's worked protection, but he's also worked removal. Removal, I repeated. Of obstacles, Marcus said, eyes on mine. You were the obstacle. Anger is different when it finds a specific face to settle on. It becomes organized. It learns to walk. The following morning, Marcus bought me breakfast at a diner we didn't belong in. He sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. The waitress flirted with him without realizing she was trying to flirt with a locked door. 2 tracks, he said, setting a napkin between us and drawing 2 parallel lines. Track 1, evidence. Bank trails, digital correspondence, security logs. Track 2, narrative. The right people in the right places see the right pieces at the right time. When evidence and narrative meet, people like Pierce don't bleed, they hemorrhage. How do we get the evidence? I asked. We take what they hide, he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. We started with the banquet hall. Marcus didn't need a warrant when he had a friend in facilities who owed him a quiet favor from years ago. By that evening, we had a download of the maintenance logs from the week leading up to the wedding and internal access footage, mostly boring, a symphony of mop buckets and carts full of linens. Then, at 6:13 a.m. on the morning of the wedding, 2 men swiped access cards near the service elevator that led to the ceiling crawlspace above the grand hall. The frames were poor, the angle worse. But the height matched. The build matched. Their faces dipped in and out of light like fish underwater. It wasn't proof, but it was gravity. Security logs say the access cards belong to contractors, Marcus said. The contractors don't exist. That means someone white-labeled the badges for a day. Who can do that? I asked. Anyone who thinks they own the building, he said. Or anyone the owner owes. We pivoted to Pierce's email. Marcus had a friend, he called him Blue, who built digital skeleton keys for a living and liked to brag that no door was truly closed. Blue didn't ask what we'd do with what he found, which made him either loyal or dangerous or both. 2 days later, Marcus plugged a flash drive into my laptop and opened a folder named Sundry, a nothing word for everything. There were threads, emails to a consulting firm with no website and 3 initials for a name, calendar invites sent to personal accounts to avoid corporate archiving, a PDF attachment titled Event Contingencies, which sounded harmless the way poison labeled vitamins might. Most of it was clean on the surface. The dirt lived in metadata and timing. There was an email sent 12 hours before the wedding asking, all contingencies online? The reply, 4 hours later, affirmative. Team positioned. Accident profile rehearsed. I stared at that line until the letters swam. Accident profile. Rehearsed. Marcus kept me moving. He knew that if I stopped too long inside one sentence, the room I was in would tilt. We still need connective tissue, he said. Nothing here says your name. They planned for you to be there, but they didn't plan to type it. How do we make it connect? I asked. We don't, he said. We let their world connect it for us. He drafted a dossier that didn't look like a dossier. It looked like a compliance officer's worst day, screenshots, logs, transaction summaries, a neat index with dates, times, and questions that sounded innocent until you tried to answer them. He tied the banquet hall access to a subcontractor with a bank account funded by a Pierce affiliate. He cross-referenced the consulting firm with an address that was a mailbox store. He included the email about contingencies, then laid next to it a press clipping about a tragic lighting malfunction at a fundraiser 18 months earlier, one Pierce had attended, one where a local politician suffered a broken collarbone but no death certificate darkened the timeline. I felt the pattern forming like frost on glass. Not a first time. Not an only time. Where does this go? I asked. In through the front door, he said. To Pierce's own company. Compliance. Internal audit. Boards. They've built a world where the thing they fear most is scandal. We're going to give them a reason to fear their own resident golden boy. And after that? After that, we don't chase, he said. We make them move toward us. That night, with Liam asleep, we sat in the living room without the laptop between us. It was the first time I'd sat without a screen anchoring me in days. Marcus explained the other half of the plan: no spreadsheets, no files. A call to a journalist who owed him a debt measured in years and cigarettes and not getting arrested on a border that doesn't exist on any map. If compliance drags their feet, the story moves, he said. Not the whole dossier, just the outline. Enough for a newsroom to sniff the blood. Are we ready for that? I asked. We're not ready for anything, he said. But we're prepared for this. He took out his phone and typed a single text to a number saved under a 3-letter alias. The reply took 4 minutes and 3 seconds. Tomorrow. Noon. Same booth. Marcus turned the phone face down and looked at me. One more piece, he said. She has to know. Know what? I said, though I understood before I finished the question. That you're not prey, he said. That the ground she thought you were standing on has shifted. He wrote a sentence on a scrap of paper and slid it to me. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even an accusation. It was a mirror angled to catch the light she'd been hiding in the dark. 4 words: you aimed. You missed. Beneath it, a timestamp and the exact location of the service elevator door from the banquet hall. No signature. No phone number. A whisper placed where she'd hear it but couldn't show it to anyone without admitting what it meant. Won't this push Pierce to come after us harder? I asked. Marcus considered, then shook his head. It pushes Pierce to defend himself to people who see. Won't that make her reckless? I asked. Reckless people leave footprints, he said. Careful people commit crimes. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, though fear lived in me like a second pulse, but because the quiet offered too much room for memory. I walked the hall, paused at Liam's door, watched his chest rise and fall. I thought about the version of my life where the chandelier had succeeded and some official voice had said the words, tragic accident, while files disappeared and bank accounts stayed fat. I thought about the version where my son had not tugged my sleeve. The corridor of what-ifs is endless and it is lethal if you walk it too long. I returned to the plan because the plan had edges I could hold. In the morning, I briefed Liam at the breakfast table, but not the way a general briefs a soldier. The way a father secures a perimeter with words a child can carry. We're going to be careful for a while, I said. We won't take the same route to school twice in a row. We'll keep our eyes open for cars that look like they're always where we are. If anything feels wrong, you say something, even if you think it's small. Especially if you think it's small. He nodded with a seriousness that cut me. Are they going to try again? He asked. Not if we make it expensive, I said. He tilted his head. I searched for a language that translated. Bullies hit people who won't hit back, I said. We're not hitting. We're making sure their fists go through a wall when they swing. At noon, Marcus met the journalist in a back booth of a diner that had more secrets than seats. The man's hair had thinned and his gut had thickened since I'd last seen him in a byline photo, but his eyes were hungry the way a story makes a man hungry. Marcus didn't hand him the dossier. He handed him 3 questions written in ink and underlined twice. Why did a subcontractor paid by a Pierce affiliate access the banquet hall ceiling 4 hours before a wedding? Why does the subcontractor's registered address belong to a mailbox store? Why did the same affiliate move funds through an island bank the week of a previous accident? The journalist didn't look at us when he pocketed the card. He looked at the door, like he could already see the story on the other side of it. "Now we wait," Marcus said as we left. "Waiting is an action if you do it right. It's choosing not to move so someone else must." Marcus filled the hours with preparation, changing my routines, setting a second phone, building an emergency plan that placed Liam at a neighbor's house with a code phrase and a bag already packed. He showed me how to scan a car with my eyes, how to clock a tail without turning my head, how to use reflections in windows like periscopes. He wasn't trying to make me paranoid. He was teaching me to be observant. Paranoia is fear without information. Observation is information without fear. In the afternoon, the first tremor arrived. Not a quake, a ripple. An email to Pierce from an internal address flagged urgent, risk review. We didn't get to read it, but we saw the subject line in the metadata blue siphoned. 20 minutes later, a meeting appeared on Pierce's calendar, compliance, unscheduled. 40 minutes after that, the journalist texted Marcus a single word, sniffing. We sent the message to her that evening. Not by phone. Not by mail. Marcus slid it under the door of a studio she rented, for yoga and quiet, the euphemism she used for an address her husband didn't share. We watched from across the street as she arrived alone at dusk, key in hand, posture taut with the grace she wore like armor. She bent, plucked the envelope from the floor, and froze in the threshold as she read it. We couldn't see her face. But we saw her hand tremble. She stepped inside without turning on the lights, sat on the floor against the wall like someone sitting with a ghost. Then, after a long minute, she stood and made a call. Marcus didn't need to hear the words to know who was on the other end. People only make that call to a fixer when they realize what they broke can't be unbroken. Reckless, Marcus said softly. She's going to step on the very wire we just laid. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the first thin thread of control reattached to my hands, not as a weapon, but as a steering wheel. Control isn't power, it's direction. That night, Blue delivered something heavier than any email subject line, a short voice memo captured from a burner line used by one of Pierce's consultants. The audio was rough, but the message came through clear enough. They know about the haul. Shut down the badges, clean the paper, and put distance between the affiliate and the subcontractor. If the board calls, it was an internal clerical error. If the press calls, there is no subcontractor. If he, a pause, as if a name had almost escaped, if he makes noise, we'll litigate the air out of him. Marcus rewound that last line and played it again. We'll litigate the air out of him. It told us something beautiful. They were switching tools. From force to paperwork. Paperwork leaves trails. Good, Marcus said. Let them fight on a field they don't control. We met in my kitchen at midnight and formalized the three-phase plan we've been building from instinct. The file would arrive on the desks of compliance and internal audit at Pierce's firm at 9:01 a.m., with time stamps that proved it had been waiting in the queue since the previous evening. No accusations, only questions attached to documents their own systems would have to authenticate. The moment they authenticated them, they'd own them. While compliance began their slow grind, a single, tightly sourced tip would hit the inbox of the journalist's editor, not from Marcus, not from me, but from a source the editor had trusted for years on corporate malfeasance, a source who would vouch only that an internal review tied to a boutique consultancy and a series of unusual events was underway. Enough smoke to justify looking for the fire. A second note, delivered to her, later, at a different address, the home address this time, containing nothing but a photograph printed from the banquet hall's internal camera, the service elevator door, time-stamped, with the staircase in the frame, and a handwritten line across the bottom, accidents don't clock in. And end him without calling the police, he said. Boards aren't loyal. They survive. He'll be triaging in his own house for days. That's time we can use to make sure nobody swings at you. We executed phase 1 with surgical calm. At 9:01 a.m., the dossier hit compliance. At 9:07, an internal auto-reply announced a ticket number. At 9:32, a private calendar entry populated the inbox of a head of audit we hadn't known existed an hour earlier. By 11, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from the journalist. "They're circling. Confirm nothing. Deny nothing. Keep breathing." Phase 2 rolled like weather. The editor called the journalist into a glass room and gestured with his chin toward the city like the skyline itself was a suspect. We didn't hear the conversation, but we saw its shape in the timing of later calls and the names that appeared, however briefly, in Pierce's phone logs. Lawyers. Board members. One name flagged red on Marcus's screen, a crisis communications firm that didn't advertise but showed up when men like Pierce needed the public to forget they existed. Phase 3 was the only part that felt like standing inside the same room as the person who tried to erase me. I wrote the line on the photo myself, my hand steady even as the words shook me, "Accidents don't clock in." We didn't stay to watch her read it. We didn't need to. Some messages are less about the recipient than about who they run to afterwards, and what footprints they leave getting there. In the quiet after the drops, I took Liam to the park. We kicked a ball on the grass and pretended not to notice the world burning in far-off rooms. He asked if things were going to be normal again. "Different," I said. "But better." He squinted at me like he was measuring whether adults ever really knew the difference. Then he nodded, like he'd decided to let me borrow his faith for the afternoon. That evening, Marcus leaned against my porch rail, scanning the street with the kind of casual that isn't. "They'll test the perimeter," he said. "Maybe a car that idles a little too long. Maybe a call that hangs up when you answer. Don't feed it. Don't chase it. If someone steps over the line, we make it cost them. And if they don't?" I asked. "Then they'll eat each other," he said. "Fear is an excellent seasoning." My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring into voicemail. A transcript appeared a minute later, a voice I knew too well saying nothing at all, just breathing, then a click. I didn't call back. For the first time since the chandelier fell, I felt the strange peace that comes with a plan unfolding, not perfectly, not safely, but forward. Marcus left just before midnight, after checking the locks and the windows, after reminding me that discipline is not paranoia, and vigilance is not fear. "Tomorrow we'll move," he said. "Be ready to be still." When the door closed behind him, I stood in the living room and listened to the house settle. In the hallway, a nightlight cast a small circle of gold on the floor, and in that circle I saw the shape of the life I wanted, Liam's laughter, a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and not like tension, mornings defined by the sound of a school backpack zipper instead of the click of a safety on a gun that shouldn't exist in a house with a child. I turned off the last light and let the dark come. Not as an enemy, but as a cover. The first battle had been survival. The second was underway now, a campaign fought in dossiers and whispers, in calendar entries and access logs, in messages that said everything without saying my name. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet is how you move through a house full of sleeping wolves and reach the door without waking any of them. And for the first time since Liam tugged my sleeve and saved my life, I believed we might actually make it to the other side, scarred, maybe, changed forever, certainly, but standing, with the people who wanted me gone tripping over the traps they set for someone they thought would never see them. Tomorrow, the fall would begin. Not mine. Theirs. There's a particular stillness in the air before a plan takes its first real step into the world. It's not peace, it's tension disguised as quiet, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. On that morning, I woke before the sun, not because of an alarm, but because my mind refused to let me rest. Today wasn't about surviving. Today was about shifting the ground beneath them so violently that they'd be too busy keeping their balance to strike again. Marcus arrived just after dawn, 2 cups of coffee in hand and a look that told me he'd already been awake for hours. He set a slim, unmarked envelope on the table. Inside was the dossier we'd built, every thread, every link, every quiet proof woven together in a way that would make even the most cynical compliance officer stop and stare. It wasn't loud. It didn't accuse. It asked questions with teeth. Questions that could only be answered by tearing open the very walls Pierce had built to protect himself. At precisely 9:01 a.m., Marcus clicked send. The packet went to 3 addresses: the head of compliance, the chief audit executive, and a single board member known for her zero-tolerance stance on internal scandals. No names were signed to it. No return address could be traced. The subject line was simple: urgent, review of contracted entities and security incidents. We didn't wait long for a tremor. At 9:17, the head of compliance marked the email as priority, triggering an internal escalation protocol we'd hoped they still followed. By 9:32, a calendar entry titled Immediate Review, Banquet Hall Access Incident appeared in the Chief Audit Officer's schedule. Marcus didn't smile, but his eyes sharpened. "They're moving," he said. While compliance dissected the dossier, we delivered the second blow, personal, surgical, aimed not at the company but at her. The message to my ex-wife was not a threat in the conventional sense. It was a mirror, reflecting back the pieces of the truth she thought were hidden. Marcus had printed a still frame from the banquet hall security footage, the service elevator door, time-stamped just hours before the wedding, with the faint outline of a man stepping out in shadow. Across the bottom, in my handwriting, were 4 words: "You aimed. You missed. We didn't mail it. We didn't hand-deliver it. We had it placed inside a folded yoga mat at the private studio she rented under her name alone, the place she went when she wanted to be invisible. We knew she'd unroll that mat before her evening session, that the photograph would fall into her lap when no one else was around. She would have no one to share it with without exposing herself. It wasn't about making her afraid, it was about making her aware that I knew." Marcus and I sat in my car down the block, watching from a position where we could see her enter but not be seen ourselves. When she arrived, she carried herself with the same polished grace I remembered from years ago, the kind that made people think she was in control even when she wasn't. She disappeared inside. 10 minutes later, the studio lights went off. She didn't come out for nearly 40 minutes. When she did, her face was pale, her steps hurried. She left without locking the door. The final phase was a handoff. Marcus had cultivated a contact in the press for years, a man who understood the difference between gossip and evidence, between rumor and a story that could bring down a career. We gave him just enough to start the fire: the subcontractor's phantom address, the offshore payment trail, and the suspicious access to the banquet hall ceiling hours before the chandelier fell. No names, no accusations, just a trail of breadcrumbs impossible to ignore. The journalist didn't need convincing. He recognized the scent of something bigger than a society scandal. "If this checks out," he said over the phone, "it's not just a hit piece, it's a corporate earthquake." He promised to verify every detail before publishing. That was exactly what we wanted. The more legitimate his work, the less they could dismiss it as fabrication. By mid-afternoon, the ripples had already started. Pierce's company issued an internal memo to pause all non-essential external contracts pending review. Compliance began pulling historical access logs, not just from the banquet hall, but from other events where Pierce had been present. Someone was connecting dots we hadn't even drawn for them. That evening, the journalist's first article went live. The headline was careful but damning: "Questions arise over security breach at high-profile wedding venue linked to prominent executive." The body of the article outlined the subcontractor's non-existent address, the questionable financial transactions, and the connection to an unexplained equipment failure during the event. Names weren't printed, but the corporate world can recognize its own players even when they're referred to as a senior executive or an influential board member's spouse. The effect was immediate. By the next morning, the story had been picked up by 2 other outlets, each adding their own flavor. One called it a pattern of suspicious incidents. Another hinted at potential negligence with criminal implications. Inside the company, the reaction was pure triage. We knew this because Marcus's contact in IT sent us snippets of internal chat logs, board members calling emergency meetings, compliance officers demanding full cooperation from Pierce's division, legal counsel warning about serious exposure. The language was corporate, but the meaning was primal. They were looking for someone to burn before the fire reached the penthouse. And all the while, she, the woman who once shared my home, was calling Pierce repeatedly. We didn't have to hear the words to know what those calls contained: panic, blame, the desperate need for reassurance that the walls weren't closing in. But they were. And every attempt they made to shore up their story only widened the cracks. By the third day, investigators outside the company had entered the picture. The journalist's article had caught the attention of a watchdog organization specializing in corporate misconduct. They announced a preliminary inquiry, stating that multiple sources had come forward with concerns about Pierce's business dealings. We knew some of those sources were people Marcus had nudged in the right direction, former associates of Pierce who had their own reasons to see him fall. The public pressure became unbearable for the company. Investors started asking questions on quarterly calls, not about earnings, but about risk. Risk to the brand. Risk to the board. Risk to themselves. Stock value dipped 2% in a single day, not catastrophic, but enough to rattle the kind of people who measure their lives in quarterly growth charts. And then came the moment I hadn't dared to imagine would happen so quickly. Pierce was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. It was corporate language for exile. Stripped of his title, his access revoked, his future uncertain. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. In truth, what I felt was a deep, quiet relief, the kind that doesn't explode in celebration but sinks into your bones like warmth after a long winter. This wasn't over. They could still come at me in ways I couldn't predict. But the balance had shifted. They were the ones scrambling now, not me. That night, Marcus and I sat on my porch, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. "This is the beginning," he said. "The fall takes time. They'll try to stop it. They might even think they've slowed it down. But the thing about momentum is, once it's rolling downhill, you can't stand in front of it without getting crushed." From inside, I could hear Liam's laughter as he talked to a friend on the phone. That sound, light, unburdened, was the only victory I needed. Everything else was just making sure the people who had tried to take him from me would never get the chance again. It started with a headline. Executive placed under investigation following security breach allegations. I saw it on the news ticker at the bottom of the television screen while I was pouring cereal for Liam. At first, it was just words. Then the anchor's voice gave them weight. Pierce's name wasn't hidden anymore. The company had officially confirmed his suspension, and the investigation was no longer internal. Law enforcement had stepped in. Within 48 hours, the headlines sharpened their edges. Federal agents raid luxury office of suspended executive. Subcontractor linked to multiple accidents in high-profile events. Former employees speak out. Each story peeled back another layer. The chandelier at the wedding wasn't the first incident. There were others, some nearly identical, others quieter but just as deliberate. In each case, the victims were people standing in the way of someone else's advancement. Marcus kept a file on the kitchen counter, adding clippings, court documents, and printouts from online articles. "Keep your own record," he said. "In their world, history gets rewritten. In yours, it should stay intact." The day the arrests came, it wasn't just Pierce. 2 men were taken into custody along with him, faces I recognized instantly. The men in black from the wedding. I watched the footage on the evening news, the camera following as they were led out of an unmarked building in handcuffs, their expressions blank. The charges read like a shopping list: conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, fraud, and racketeering. Then came the part one didn't expect. The news cameras caught my ex-wife slipping out of a side entrance to the courthouse, flanked by 2 attorneys. Her head was down, sunglasses covering most of her face, but I didn't need to see her eyes to recognize the panic in her posture. She wasn't under arrest, not yet, but it was clear her name was circulating in the same circles as Pierce's. That night, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I knew it was her before I even answered. I let the silence stretch before I spoke. "Hello." Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "You win," she said. No preamble. No attempt to pretend this was about something else. Just two words that seemed to cost her everything. "I didn't play to win," I replied. "I played to protect Liam." There was a pause, a long inhale. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said, and I could hear the lie in it. She had known enough. "Pierce told me it was just a scare. That it would keep you out of the picture." "You signed up for that," I said, my tone flat. "You signed him into Liam's life." Her voice cracked. "Do you think I don't regret it?" I didn't answer. Regret was useless now. The damage had been done, and the law was finally circling close enough to smell the rot. She ended the call without saying goodbye. 2 weeks later, the custody hearing was set. Marcus came with me, though he didn't step into the courtroom. He said it wasn't his arena. But I knew he was in the hallway, watching, ready for anything. The evidence was stacked neatly in my favor, not just the investigation into Pierce, but the clear threat to Liam's safety. My ex-wife's attorneys tried to argue for shared custody, painting her as an uninformed bystander in Pierce's schemes. But the judge wasn't buying it. When the ruling came, it was clean and final, full custody granted to me. She would have supervised visitation only, contingent on the outcome of the ongoing investigation. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just turned to look at Liam, sitting quietly beside me in his small navy blazer. His hand found mine under the table, and I squeezed it. The last time I saw her outside of a courtroom was on the day of Pierce's formal arraignment. She was leaving the courthouse as we were entering for a separate hearing. For a brief second, our eyes met. There was no anger there anymore, just exhaustion, like someone who had been running from a fire only to realize it was inside her all along. Months later, the final scene played out in a courtroom filled with press and onlookers. Pierce sat at the defense table, pale and drawn, flanked by attorneys who looked more tired than he did. The men in black took plea deals. And then it was her turn. She had been charged with conspiracy and obstruction, less than she deserved, perhaps, but enough to end the life she'd built on lies. The bailiff called her name, and she rose. The sound of metal cuffs clicking around her wrists was louder in my head than in the room. I didn't watch her face. I looked down at Liam instead. He was holding my hand, his fingers laced tightly through mine. His grip was steady, his eyes forward. As the bailiff led her away, the judge's voice droned on with the procedural close. The press scribbled notes, cameras clicked, and somewhere behind us, Marcus leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching like a man who had seen the end of many wars. When it was over, we walked out into the sunlight. The courthouse steps felt strangely symbolic, each one a little further away from the weight we'd been carrying. At the bottom, I crouched so I was eye level with Liam. "It's over," I said. "We can start fresh." He nodded, but there was a seriousness in his expression. "We already started," he said. And he was right. The moment we'd walked out of that banquet hall alive, the rebuilding had begun. We got into the car, Marcus sliding into the passenger seat, and for the first time in months, I drove without looking into the rearview mirror every few seconds. Some battles end with a bang, others with a quiet closing of a door. Ours ended with both, the loud clang of handcuffs and the soft click of Liam's seatbelt as we drove toward a life no one would be able to take from us again. We didn't move far. I used to think redemption required a new city, a new zip code, a horizon without a single familiar shape. Turns out, it only required a new street where morning light fell through different trees, and where the mail came to a box with our names on it, just ours. The house we found wasn't big, but it breathed. Windows that opened without groaning. A porch that held the weight of 2 chairs and a small table that always seemed to collect the day's small treasures, a marble Liam found on a walk, a guitar pick from his lesson, a folded receipt with a joke scribbled on the back. It wasn't much. It was everything. The first morning there, I made pancakes too early and too thick. Liam laughed when the edges burned. We sat on the floor because the table hadn't arrived yet, eating from paper plates and talking about how the backyard would look with a soccer net, a garden, a hammock. It felt like drawing the lines of a map with a child's markers, bold and a little messy, but ours. After breakfast, I taught him how to change the batteries in the smoke detector and how to check the front lock twice without obsessing. Vigilance, not fear. He picked it up quickly, because children learn what they live. I decided right there what he would live from now on: steadiness. School started a week later. On the first day, he wore a navy polo and shoes that squeaked on the hallway tiles. I watched him trace the alphabet painted along the wall with his fingertip as we waited by the office. The principal, a woman with kind eyes and a firm voice, shook my hand and told me they took safety seriously. I believed her. Before I left, Liam slipped a small note into my palm, folded tight. "You can go now," it read. "I'm okay." I kept that note in my wallet like a passport to a country I never wanted to leave. In the afternoons, the house filled with music. At first it was hesitant, single notes, fingers searching. Then the chords came, the mistakes softened, and the melodies started to sound like something a person could follow. I sat at the kitchen table while he practiced, paying bills and answering emails I had been avoiding, the ordinary chores that make a life real. Sometimes he'd stop and ask if I liked a certain song. I always did. Even when I didn't, I did. Not because the music was perfect. Because he was playing it in a room where he felt safe. Marcus visited less, by design. His work was done, though he still texted sometimes. "You good? Need anything?" I'd send back a photo of Liam in mid-laugh or a snapshot of a sunset from the porch, and he'd reply with a thumbs up and a dot of ellipsis that always felt like a salute. He refused to be a permanent shadow in our new life. That was his gift. He came when we needed a storm and left when we needed a sky. The legal dust settled in its own time. Papers arrived with stamps and signatures that ensured what the judge had already said out loud: Liam was mine to raise, to protect, to guide. Supervised visits were offered and declined, rescheduled and postponed, then finally set like a clock that no longer mattered to the rhythm of our days. I didn't speak ill of her in front of Liam, even when the temptation was a live wire in my throat. I taught him that truth doesn't need venom to be true. He absorbed that lesson the way he absorbed the chord changes, slowly, then all at once. On Sundays, we developed a ritual. We'd pack simple lunches, sandwiches, apples, a thermos of lemonade, and drive with no destination, picking left or right at random. We found a lake where ducks learned our footsteps, a farmer's stand with strawberries that tasted like the color red itself, a used bookstore where the owner leaned on the counter and told us every book we chose was his favorite for a different reason. We bought a worn mystery novel and read it together on the porch, 2 chapters at a time. Sometimes he guessed the twists correctly. Sometimes I did. We always pretended the other had been smarter. At night, when the house was quiet and the world outside dimmed down to the soft glow of a solitary street lamp, the questions came. Not always out loud. Sometimes they rose like steam from a cup left too long on the counter. I'd sit on the porch and consider the difference between justice and revenge. People like to dress them in the same clothes, but they walk differently. Justice looks forward, steady, measured. Revenge looks back, sharp, breathing hard. What we did was neither clean nor simple. It didn't erase what almost happened. It didn't make us saints. But it did this: it closed the door they tried to pry open, bolted it, and built a wall behind it. Sometimes that's as close to justice as a human life can get. I kept a journal, something I hadn't done since I was young enough to believe paper could hold the weight of a person's heart. I wrote down the little things: The first morning I made pancakes without burning them, the day Liam's music teacher said he had an ear, the moment I realized I had gone a full hour without checking the locks. I wrote down a line for him as a kind of compass: forgiveness is a gift. Safety is a responsibility. If he ever asked me to choose which mattered more, I'd tell him the truth: safety first. Then, if forgiveness comes, it comes. Sometimes Liam would bring up the wedding without naming it. He'd say, "Remember when we left that place in a hurry?" And I'd say, "I remember, you were brave." He'd nod and return to his homework, the way a person nods when they've checked a door and found it still closed. Once, he said, "I knew it would happen, Dad." I asked him how. He said he'd heard them talking and knew how they sounded. "Like ice," he said, looking at his shoe. "Like ice that wants to cut." I told him he did the right thing. He looked up then. We both did. The past didn't vanish. It softened. If it were a scar, it would be the kind whose edges you can trace without flinching. Birthdays returned to being about cake and candles. The calendar stopped looking like a minefield and started looking like a place to put soccer games and parent-teacher meetings. I learned the names of his friends. He learned to make an omelet without breaking the yolks. The world turned, and we turned with it, slower, more careful, but turning still. One afternoon in late autumn, we planted a small tree in the backyard. The ground was stubborn, the shovel old, but we took turns anyway, trading the handle back and forth, laughing when the earth refused us and laughing again when it finally gave in. When the sapling stood, we packed soil around its roots and watered it until the ground went dark. "It's small," Liam said, taking a step back. "It won't be," I answered. He considered that and nodded. "Like us," he said. I didn't trust my voice, so I squeezed his shoulder, and we went inside to warm our hands around mugs of hot chocolate. I used to think closure was an event. A verdict. A headline. A moment when everyone clapped or cried or nodded and said, "There it is." Now I think closure is a practice. It's wiping down a counter at the end of the day. It's showing up on time. It's putting a name on a lunch bag and knowing the lunch will be eaten by the person you love. It's trust, rebuilt in the mundane. It's the life no one can take because it's made of 1,000 small, private choices. Every so often, a letter arrives from some office with a seal, informing us of dates and outcomes the world might care about. I file them in a drawer marked with an uninspired label, legal. The real record is in the house itself, the scuff on the hallway wall where Liam misjudged a turn with his backpack, the pencil marks on the pantry door measuring inches of growth, the way the porch boards remember the weight of our chairs. If you stood outside our window at dusk and listened, you'd hear a boy practicing a song that's a little too ambitious for his hands and a man humming along, off-key but undeterred. You'd hear the clatter of plates, the rumble of a vacuum cleaner, the quiet click of a lamp switched on. You wouldn't hear revenge. You'd hear something stronger, stability. So here is what I tell my son as the house settles and the day lets go. Sometimes, the world asks you to choose between letting something break you or breaking the thing that wants to. We didn't choose vengeance. We chose to make sure they could never hurt us again. He looks at me, eyes clear, and repeats it back in his own words. Then he turns out the light, and we climb the stairs together, one step, then another, the sound of our feet a promise we intend to keep. And if there's a lesson left to say out loud, I say it softly, to him and to the dark beyond the window. Sometimes revenge is just making sure they can never hurt you again. We've done that. Now we live.